This is the Stephen Gashler Show, the weekly podcast in which I, Stephen Gashler, the King of America, boldly pursue my quest to usher in a new era of chivalry. I seek out the greatest souls of our time who might be worthy to take honorary seats at my living room table, so that knights can once again rampage the earth, and new tales of silly adventures can be sung for the 21st century. Today we have a very special guest, the one... What's going on?
Hey, someone left this at the door for you.
You don't know who?
No, it doesn't say.
Huh. Thanks.
Hey, no problem.
It appears that someone has left me a raspberry pie. Likely one of my admirers, or I suppose this could possibly be my arch-nemesis trying to foil me once again. Maybe I'll just take a small little sample. It does look quite delectable. I'll just stick my finger here into this raspberry goodness and take one little lick. Another failed assassination attempt against the King of America. Luckily, I had an extra life. And now, the fanfare. Today we have a very special guest, George McEwan. Now, George is a very versatile guy. He is the 4 times winner of the Utah's Biggest Liar storytelling contest. I know because I've competed against him and he's beaten me most of the time. He is also a pilot. He's been an inventor. He's been a soldier. He's a pretty cool guy. So I wanted to have him on my show today. George, how you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for the introduction, Steve.
And speaking of storytelling, it only seemed fitting that if we're going to interview a storyteller, we sure as heck better have a story. So here's one by George McEwan.
The best part about being a pilot is having friends who are pilots, especially when they lend you their airplanes. When my friend Jay called early one morning to ask if I would fly his plane from Salt Lake to Boise for him, I was so excited that I squealed like a little girl, grabbed my flight bag, packed a quick lunch, and drove straight out to the airport. I was in such a rush that my eclectic lunch consisted of a thermos of milk, a box of crackers, and a can of tuna. Now, Jay owns a beautiful red biplane that he calls Houston, and if you didn't know it, we pilots name our planes so that we can talk to them. Houston and I taxied out to the runway, called the tower, clearance for takeoff was granted, and off we went, flying north out of Salt Lake International Airport. After 10 minutes, I heard the tower call, "You've cleared controlled airspace. Radar support is discontinued. Have a great day." I smiled because this meant no one was watching, and I could really cut loose. Immediately, I started doing loops and dives and spins, imagining I was in a dogfight like Eddie Rickenbacker, the famous World War I ace. Oh, I could have done that all day long. But looking at the fuel gauge, I realized I had to get back on course. As we continued north, Houston bumped around a lot in the turbulence because it was a hot day. In pilot speak, rising hot air is called a thermal, and it literally is a gigantic bubble of rising hot air. Generally, they're not too bad unless you're in a small plane like Houston, where you have to ride up one side and down the other, just like being on a roller coaster. Personally, it doesn't bother me at all unless I have a passenger sitting next to me screaming, "We're all gonna die!" That can get a bit irritating. I was truly enjoying the ride until Houston flew up over the top of Lava Hot Springs. That's when something strange happened. I felt the bump of a thermal, but instead of flying through it, Houston was caught in an updraft and floated up to 20,000 feet where he just bobbled around like a cork. I tried adding engine power, removing it. Nothing seemed to work. We were stuck fast. Houston, we have a problem. I fought the thermal for a few more minutes and realized it could be all afternoon before it cooled down enough to let me break free. It was such a beautiful day, and I was getting hungry, and there were eagles soaring high above. It would have been a shame to waste it sitting in that cockpit. Only one thing to do. I set the parking brake, safety first. Then I said a little prayer and turned off the engine, grabbed my lunch, and climbed out and on top of the wing. So there I was on a wing and a prayer with my box of crackers, my thermos of milk, and my can of tuna. Only it wasn't tuna. In my haste that morning, I had grabbed sardines instead. I hate sardines. But, considering the uniqueness of my current situation, I was simply going to have to make do. And as I popped open that can, an eagle swooped in and parked himself on the wing about 3 feet away and gave me one of those looks. You know the one. Are you going to eat that? Whoa, did you see that? Hey, Houston, the eagle has landed. Well, as I looked at that bird, I realized he had a massive 8-foot wingspan, and if I could add that to Houston's, I might get enough lift to break free. So I gathered up my lunch and calmly and slowly climbed down into the cockpit, all while being under an eagle-eyed stare. I set the can down and put one sardine on top of the wing. Sure enough, that eagle scooted over, and as he gobbled it up, I grabbed him by the legs, and he almost pulled me out of the cockpit trying to get away. Houston pitched forward, and that can of sardines slid down the nose, plastering its contents all over the propeller. The ding of that can against the propeller was like a dinner gong because 25 eagles swooped in and latched onto that propeller just as I was trying to start the engine. With the added weight on the nose, Houston slipped into a fast dive and I experienced weightlessness. Some spare change floated by, followed by my lidless thermos trailing a beautiful undulating blob of whole milk. Now, I had no time to cry over that spilled milk because things were about to get complicated. Since the engine couldn't turn the propeller, the airplane spun instead, and when the wings hit that milk, Houston became the world's fastest butter churn, instantly covering everything in a fine, greasy mist. As we spun faster, I'd like to say that the centripetal forces built up enough that the eagles had to let go. The truth is, they were laughing so hard they couldn't hold on any longer. Well, it was hard to pull out of that spinning dive of death with buttered controls and a throttle stuck wide open, but I did it. However, Houston's wings were bending backwards as he approached the speed of sound. This was not good. So I turned south and flew back over the Great Salt Lake, called the airport, told them I was declaring an emergency and needed to land now. Their response was not encouraging. "You're going too fast for the approach. You will overshoot the runway, crash, and die. Have a great day." Well, obviously I didn't want to do that, so I tried dragging the landing gear in the water, just like skipping a stone to slow down. And as I fought to see through the salt spray, I thought, I'm scared, hot, buttered, covered in salt. I'm not Eddie Rickenbacker. I'm Orville Redenbacher. "You're still too fast. Please continue to slow down." Well, there was only one thing I could do at this point to save my life. I threw the crackers up over my shoulder and executed a perfect loop. At the bottom of the loop, we caught up with the crackers, Houston's propeller neatly vaporizing them into crumbs that stuck all over the buttered wings. And as I hoped, 2,000 seagulls answered the clarion call of a free lunch and piled onto that plane, slowing us down enough to make a safe landing. Now, I've been told that every experience in life teaches us something, and I agree. And I think I can sum up this story for you in just one word. Butterflies.
Well, that's fun. Now, to the audience out there, I think a lot of people don't even realize that storytelling is something you can do professionally, maybe even possibly for money. Tell me a little bit about that. What is storytelling all about to you?
Well, storytelling is the oldest art, and if you talk about performance arts, if you go back to even Shakespearean times, people think of those as plays, but all they are is oral stories that are set out with multiple characters. In my case, I was introduced to the professional storytelling at the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival. That was about 17, 18 years ago when I was introduced to that by a couple friends. And I was just hooked from the very first moment. And it was, the stories were good that I heard that very first year. And I got to hear a couple of the grand masters that are out there like Don Davis and Bill Lepp. And what I really enjoyed is sitting there in the open air down at the Seychelles there in Orem. I was entranced by the concept that here was a performance art that was still intimate. This is not something that translates well onto TV or radio. I mean, people do it all the time, but it is just so much fun to sit there and be in the moment with the crowd and listening to the stories. And for me, the storytelling was not something I ever considered as a professional career until one of my friends said, you are the life of most of our parties. You have these great, crazy stories from your life. You ought to go up to one of the festivals and just apply to be a professional storyteller. So I, just on a whim, went and applied for the Weber State Storytelling Festival, and I was accepted. And I went up and I did an 8-minute stint, and I was paid $50 for my time. And I thought, wow, this is great. You can get paid to do this.
I have a pretty similar experience, too. I remember when somebody first told me about the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival and how cool it was. I remember rolling my eyes. I was just in high school then thinking stories. I mean, who wants to go hear a bunch of people tell stories? If I wanted that, I could watch a movie. But It really is a unique experience, and there's nothing quite like it. Being there in the moment and connecting with the storyteller and exercising the imagination in ways that other mediums just don't do so much anymore.
Well, I agree. And that's one of the things that I like about the storytelling is, the people who are the professional storytellers, they're wandering around the festival, getting food, milling around, looking at stuff in the festivals. And unless you know who they are, they're just ordinary people. They don't come with their own posse of hangers-on or their own private security. They're just people. And when they get up on that stage and they transform into the quote-unquote storyteller, they are as cool to me as a rock star.
So you said your friends said you should consider making this a professional career. Is that something that is actually happening, or is it more of a hobby?
Well, it's still in the hobby category for me because I have kids at home who are heading off to school and things like that. So, when I'm an empty nester, that's something I would love to consider. Part of it is every storyteller, I think, if they're honest with themselves, they always consider themselves the worst storyteller out there. And so the idea that you could convert this over into a career is a little intimidating. But there are people who do it. And I've been successful enough to win a few awards and to get a little bit of traction in the professional world. And mostly, I think if I can get my name recognition up, I would gladly go on the circuit. There's a pretty extensive circuit out there, and I was actually surprised to find out how many festivals there really are. So, yeah, there's actually ways you can make a living at it.
So speaking of your awards, you are the 4 times winner of the Utah's Biggest Liar contest. How does that make you feel?
I've enjoyed it. The thing that's been really humbling about it is there are so many good, high-quality storytellers in Utah. And when I do win, it's always a shocker to me. It's not something I go in there arrogantly and say, yep, this trophy's mine. I'm going to end up with this golden shovel. And this year especially was my dear wife Leslie was saying, I was prepared to console you with a 3rd place just out of the gate. And I told her I thought the same thing. So, it's been fun. I hang the trophies in my office at work, which when you come into my office and people see golden shovels hanging on the wall, there's always a conversation as to why. And, you get a little typecast when you've done it for a while, so everyone thinks the only stories I do are all Biggest Liar stories, which I guess is fun, but it's also unfortunate because I have a lot of stories that are wacky but true.
Well, you're obviously good at tall tales. What's your secret? How do you take the trophy every time?
Well, one of the things I learned from Bill Lepp, who was kind of recognized as the grand master of all Big Liar's stories, was you have to keep the audience going with you on a track of believability until it's too late for them to get out. So they're invested in the story and how it's going to end. And by the time you've got them invested and you start throwing out the fantastic and the obvious big whoppers, they don't care. They're enjoying the story at that point. And so I've tried to work that into my stories. And I always make sure that I draw from something that is real, that's happened, so that I can feel passionate about it. And then I just move it along. So, for example, Bill Lepp tells a story about being in the traffic pattern over Atlanta in a plane trying to get home to West Virginia. And he's told that the tire's blown out and he's sitting in the emergency row. And so he gets tasked with changing the tire in flight. And everyone's with him right up until that point, but now they want to know how he's going to do it. So that's kind of the secret.
So to reiterate that, is it sort of about a subtle transference from believable to unbelievable?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One story I told, I guess my first year that I won the contest, I was talking about a potato cannon. And, you need to make sure that your material relates to a lot of people. And kids growing up in the era I did all made tennis ball cannons or potato cannons. And they were a lot of fun. And you could believe it if I said it shot 200 yards. But about the time I started saying that it was shooting over Mount Olympus and we were losing potatoes in flight, then it's into the crazy.
If somebody out here is wanting to get started in storytelling, how would you tell them to start? How would they get material? How would they find an audience? Give us some advice.
Well, there's several places. We're very fortunate in Utah that we have a very strong storytelling guild. So the Utah Storytelling Guild has chapters pretty much in every major city and In the ones that aren't major cities, there's a storytelling guild that's very close. In terms of collecting up material,